Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Businessweek, and our next guest is a correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning, a frequent panelist on NPR's Wait, Don't Tell Me, the host and, of course, of cooking channels My Grandmother's Ravioli. Spent years earlier in his career as a correspondent on The Daily Show as well as on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
Keep going.
There's more. There's more. Okay. New York Times bestselling author of Mobituaries, Great Lives Worth Reliving, a companion to his podcast of the same name. He's got a new book. It's out last week. It's called Roctogenarians, late in life debuts, comebacks, and triumphs. We have Mo Rocca with us, but I'm afraid the interview's over.
I was going to say, we've run out of time.
We just did your whole introduction.
And we didn't even get to my Broadway credits.
Not yet.
I've seen you dance.
How are you?
I'm just saying. Well, we'll talk about that
offline.
Welcome. We've been, Tim and I've had some fun over the weekend going through the book. It's really fun because I kind of started in the beginning. I went to the back. You could just kind of open and read some different stories. I want to ask though a little bit about your career. You've had many chapters already, as we just kind of laid out. And I have to say, a producer of ours brought this to our attention. Wishbone the dog, played by Soccer the dog.
Yes.
You did an obituary about soccer after he was gone. It was a show for kids. Your first job in TV?
It was my first job, and it is the toolbox I keep going back to all the time. Honestly, I don't want to sound too grand about it, talking about being a storyteller, but really that job was storytelling boot camp because we, a very small writing staff, had to take classic novels and break them down into half-hour episodes as seen through the eyes of a Jack Russell Terrier, a dog for kids between the ages of 6 and 11. It was like a writing assignment devised by an English professor on acid, and it was just the best way to learn.
We're showing everybody the dog for those who are watching on
great.
YouTube and Bloomberg.
He was a
originals.
great dog.
This is like a commencement address. Really?
Sure.
The idea that your first job is the toolkit, as you've had this amazing career that you continue to go back to over and over again.
Yeah.
It's remarkable to hear because everybody says, your first job, it's not going to be your last job. Don't worry about it. But it will have an effect on who you become.
Oh, and, my boss there, she gave me some real tough love because I sort of thought, I don't really know what I'm doing. And so my scripts were kind of half-baked. And she said, you just had to figure this out. And she took a couple of books on really screenwriting, and she just threw them down on my desk at one point. She said, figure it out because this is a great opportunity. And it was a great opportunity, in part because 6 to 11-year-olds, you can't fool them. And so you can't just write a lazy script with characters just kind of talking to each other. It has to be really lean and dynamic, and the action has to keep moving forward or they'll lose interest. So it was a really great audience to have to write for.
What is it about getting snapshots of, people's lives, individuals, great works as you did with Wishbone? What is it about kind of like telling vignettes that you love doing? Because you do this, it's obviously in this book.
Well, it's sort of the same thing that drew me to obituaries, which was the subject of my last book and podcast. A good obituary is about someone's life, not their death, and I love a good life story.
I love reading obituaries, especially but go ahead.
Because a good obituary is sort of like the trailer for an Oscar-winning biopic. It has a sweep, a drama, a romance, the highs, the lows, the triumphs, the tragedies. And my father was a real romantic and a very optimistic person, very buoyant, and so he loved to read growing up in the Washington, D.C. area when there were 2 daily papers. He would say, oh boy, the obits is my favorite section of the paper. So I just love a person's story. It's hard. I'm not sure how else to put it. Yeah.
Do they also, though, teach us about how we want to live our lives?
Completely. There are times that I've been a competitive obit writer, like you're sort of reading an obit and then you go, oh my God, he did all of that by the time he was 25.
Right. Not to make it all about the person who's not dead, but...
Right, I know, but it's hard not to sometimes. And then you're like, oh my God, he went to prison at 35, I'm doing fine. There's this metric going. But, in this case, my co-author and I wanted to tell stories of people who accomplished great things late in life because, obviously, old age, advanced age is very much in the news, a very hot topic. not just in politics, but as the population ages.
Well, I think I would say for myself, like, I think as I've gotten older, history in general is interesting, but also I think about the older folks that have been in my lives. Like, I love hearing about their stories and kind of what they had to go through. Having said that, sometimes having, it's the folks that you write about, sometimes it's their first chapter, sometimes it's the second chapter, sometimes it's the third chapter. Kind of talk to us a little bit about that, right? It's not sometimes their first act.
Right.
Or sometimes it is.
Well, exactly. It's a variety. It's debuts, comebacks, and sort of it's capstones. A lot architects. It's one of these amazing things that architects just keep getting better and better. And I think there are a couple of practical reasons. If you're doing a commission for a big expensive building, you want somebody with experience, right? You probably don't want a young starter architect.
Right.
And more architects of advanced age also are likely to have a staff doing a lot of the grunt work by that point. But all of these people have in common that they don't accept this very strange, pervasive, and kind of insidious message that your third act of life is a time to kind of wind things down. I'm not sure where that came from. And also, we're going to continue living longer and longer. If we're fortunate and have good health, decent health care. There are also people that don't look backwards. They're very in it. So they're not doing victory laps. They're not sitting at home playing highlight reels of their, great achievements. And that's okay if you want to do that. If you want to do that and hang out and just reminisce, but that's not what these people in this book do.
I want to get to some of the stories in just
Please.
a few minutes, but before we do that, talk a little bit about the organization of the book, because it reads in a really interesting way.
I have learned from the best at CBS Sunday Morning, which is a 45-year-old arts and culture show on CBS. My executive producer, Rand Morrison, believes very much in mix. Like you have to, and part of that is surprises. So you go from, I'm proud that the book includes Henri Matisse, and Clara Peller, the Where's the Beef lady, and a tortoise, Mr. Pickles.
I knew you were going to get to Mr.
Right,
Pickles.
we had
I
to
like
get to
Mr.
Mr. First-time father at 90. Take that, Al Pacino. But so mix is very important. I think when you turn the page, you want to be. I'm big into delight. Like on my obit, I would just want it to be like Mo Rocca, who delighted audiences, died today. He was 116. But so that's a big part of it. So it's not chronological. We just wanted it to have a decent mix so that, I almost think of it in terms of protein and carbs. Like some stories have import and kind of grandeur, like Mary Church Terrell, the civil rights leader who at the age of 86 led sit-ins at segregated Washington, D.C. lunch counters. But that's a good, filling, nutritious, really story. And then you want something just kind of fizzy and fun. Carol Channing finding love at 82.
Yeah. Well, we've got about a minute and then we'll come back and talk some more. You said you want to surprise and delight. Like, is there one name in particular that you think, I feel like you just gave us some names that could surprise and delight, but is there one name in particular that you think people might be surprised to see in this book?
Surprised to see.
Beyond Mr. Pickles.
Yeah, beyond Mr. Pickles.
Or Yoda.
Well, John Henry the Thoroughbred, maybe. I'm going to non-humans here.
Yeah. I love that you did a bunch, like horses.
Horses, right, because we had to because in horse years, or Snowman the show jumper at 11 might as well have been 100 in human years.
Yeah.
I also think there has to be an element of warmth. You need warmth. And the story of Frank McCourt, I think, is just... I become moved just even thinking about someone who spent his life struggling with how to tell his story, thinking that his story wasn't worth telling, being ashamed of growing up poor in Ireland, and then finally getting the story out of him because, in his own words, he would have died howling if he hadn't.
Yeah, and it's a story that I think impacted so many people when you read that book. It's unbelievable. Don't go anywhere.
I'm not. This is great.
We might have to talk a little bit more about Mr. Pickles, but we're going to continue with
and
Mo
Mrs.
Rocca
Pickles.
And Mrs. Pickles.
I don't know that they're married.
Okay.
I'm not judging.
Details. Maybe we'll talk about, too, one of the things that we really love is the folks that maybe didn't spend their later years in such a smart way. That was a fun chapter that Tim and I have been talking about in the newsroom. Mo Rocca is with us. His book, Roctogenarians, is just out, and we're going to continue our conversation. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek. All right, as we've been talking, Warren Buffett, Colonel Sanders, Ethel Merman, Yoda, Mr. Pickles, Mel Brooks, I Am Pei, the woman who became a mom at the age of 90. Check your Hebrew Bible on that one. So much in between. They're all in a book, Mo Rocca and Jonathan Greenberg. It's called Roctogenarians, Late in Life, Debuts, Comebacks, and Triumphs. Mo Rocca is here in studio with us. It is fascinating. There's just so many different names. There are names people will definitely know. There are names that people might not. How did you go about figuring out who you wanted to include?
Well, I didn't want to go. I hate to start with what I didn't want to do, but I didn't want to go too entertainment heavy. There are actors, Rita Moreno, whom I've interviewed before, and
who's a pistol.
Who is really a pistol. I mean, she's amazing at 92. Morgan Freeman, because I love The Electric Company, and they both were on it, and they kind of have intertwined lives. By law, we had to include at least one Golden Girl. I think we would have been arrested if we didn't. And Estelle Getty was a story to tell because she made her television debut at 62, really after a life of kind of raising her family and doing every little bit of off Broadway theater she could. So, I mean, it just seemed right that she should have this amazing, iconic role at the end. But we wanted to make sure that there was a real range of people. So one of the things I'm interested in is sort of people who are obviously respected, but kind of famous in sort of sub-worlds, if you will. So I called my friend Scott Ehrlich, whose family has worked in winemaking for many years, and I said, who is someone in the winemaking world that's just remarkable for his longevity? And he's, without skipping a beat, he said Mark Grgic is the guy, a Croatian immigrant, or an immigrant from what was then Yugoslavia. And he was alive at the time. He only died last year, right before our publication. So he was active up until the age of 100. And I love the fact that he was really the reason, this amazing immigrant story, that that American, specifically California wines, became contenders. The Judgment of Paris in 1976, when American wines and French wines were competed against each other in a blind taste test in Paris, organized by kind of a wag of a British promoter who expected it to be a runaway French victory. And both the red and white Americans, the white from Grgic's winery, won.
Shockingly,
it
right?
shocked the world. It changed the world of wine. And I just loved his story. And he's somebody who had persevered throughout his life, but late into his life, bringing winemaking in a very elevated way back to his homeland of Croatia. So it had a beautiful,
like
full circle.
Right?
Yeah.
You also stumble on names when you're reading the book and you say, wait a second, I've always seen a Roget's Thesaurus on a bookshelf or as a college student. I had no idea there was a guy named Roget, and he was old when he wrote it.
He was, and I keyed into him because I love making lists myself, and I know the capital of every country in the world, and I used to do strange things as a child.
Don't make us quiz you.
Wait.
No,
I know.
Please don't quiz me right now.
Where do we go?
Please don't throw out a random country name. Please don't do that.
Okay.
She's thinking Brunei, and the capital is Bandar Seri Begawan.
Show off.
Okay, and Tim, now you ask, what's the capital of Djibouti?
Yeah, Djibouti.
The capital of Djibouti is Djibouti. Trick question,
Oh,
right? That's
okay.
it. Yeah.
That's a good one.
So
you like lists.
I used to make crazy lists, and I used to waterways near state capitals. That's one. But anyway, Peter Mark Roget did the same thing as a child. I think for different reasons. I did it because I was just maybe sort of curious and strange, which are synonyms, right? And he had a lot of tragedy in his life, personal loss, and one of his biographers believed it was a way of coping. But he returned to these lists that he had been working on at the age of 73 and published the Roget's Thesaurus, and until the age of 90, he kept refining it and working on it. But and so that's sort of an unfinished business, which is something I like. A lot of these stories are people, in a sense, returning to childhood in more obvious ways with Frank McCourt and Laura Ingalls Wilder, who brought us the Little House books, by writing about their quite literal childhoods. But then people like the concert pianist Ruth Slenczynska. As a child, she was called the Shirley Temple of classical music. And this is a woman who at the age of 9, she had subbed for Rachmaninoff. Okay, and I interviewed her when she was 97 because she had an album come out. I interviewed her for CBS. But what I found was a woman who had been really tormented by her father as a child prodigy, and the piano was a punishment, and she was just so enormously talented, and he was brutal to her. She wasn't. She literally was not allowed to play with dolls or go outside and play with other kids. And much later in life, she returned to the piano on her own terms and learned to love it for the sake of itself. And I found that so beautiful.
I don't even know that there's no easy segue here, but the founding fathers of comedy. I mean, we have some guys who have been making us laugh for decades.
Yeah.
And I know some have passed away, and
Right.
I think about Norman Lear. But you dig into what they've been doing.
Well, Norman Lear, Mel Brooks, and Carl Reiner, who were all good friends, and I got to know Norman moderately well.
Yeah.
I would say he was a friend by the end of his life. And together, when you think of their body of work, they are largely responsible for at least a big part of what we actually laugh at. I mean, Carl Reiner with the Dick Van Dyke Show really did help create the modern situation comedy. And then Norman Lear made sure that it actually said something. And this is an undeniably culturally Jewish thing, and that needs to be celebrated and acknowledged for what they did and what they have given us. So much of what we laugh at and think is funny comes from them. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And Mel Brooks is still going. Mel Brooks is very different than the other two, because I think Mel Brooks, there was this a grumpiness about him. A lot of what drove him was anger at injustice, at the horrors of the Holocaust. I mean, making fun of Hitler, knocking him off his pedestal, was a real driving force of behind what Mel Brooks did.
Like
so
in Producers,
brilliantly.
for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's really remarkable.
Yeah.
We have to ask you about those who misspent their old age. We have to
Yeah,
go
there's
there.
a whole chapter here about folks that some of whom are household names, some aren't, who misspent their old age. One of those, you argue, is Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani, this chapter is comprised of people that you think all you had to do is do nothing. Just enjoy the laurels. Take those victory laps. Just, first, second, and finally, just do no harm. And Rudy Giuliani, there's certainly his mayoralty can be addressed, but I don't think it's debatable that the city was in key measures better off once he finished as mayor than it was at the beginning. I think when he became Person of the Year for Time, it wasn't just an acknowledgement for how he handled the aftermath of 9/11. I think it was also for how he had shown that a city could be governed, which is something that had been in some doubt, I think, that a city like New York could be governed. And then his behavior since then, and with the 2020 election and the Georgia election workers. And there's a reason he is bankrupt. I don't know if he's legally bankrupt. You can correct me on that if he's declared bankruptcy. But
there's a lot of stuff still going on in terms of his assets.
He really could have just done nothing and been okay.
How about, we've just got about a minute or so left here. I mean, going through this and all the reporting you've done as a journalist and these stories, does any of it make you think differently about how you want to live?
Yes. And I think this is happening anyway. One of the unexpected things of getting older, I'm 55 now, is that I'm actually, and I'm happy to report, fretting less about the future, which I think I didn't expect that to happen. I would think that the less time you have on the other side, the more you'd fret.
Yeah.
I'm not, and I think that that's a characteristic of a lot of these people. So I'm a little freer to act. I'm less, and I think in a way, you might as well act now, because people's memories are short. And when you're gone, your children, your loved ones will remember you, hopefully for at least a little bit of time. but you might as well act now, enjoy life, and be in the present, because it goes by quickly.
No, you're right. Be in the present and don't be afraid to do new things, right? Even as you get older.
And I'm also trying to speak more deliberately in sentences that can be diagrammed instead of just run-on crazy sentences where I'm just filling space.
Before we let you go, capital of Slovenia?
Oh, the Ljubljana?
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Just making sure.
That sounded like I
That's
made
what
up
he
a
was
sound.
just-
Just
He
keeping
was trying.
you honest
Okay.
here.
We might be emailing
I
you
was
some
just
more
slurring.
questions.
I was actually just slurring, but okay.
Mo Rocca, thank you so much. Inspiring and really thoughtful and just fun to read. Roctogenarians with Jonathan Greenberg, Late in Life, Debuts, Comebacks, and Triumphs. Thank you so much.